Hi, everybody. Welcome to Urantia Book Science and History. Today, I've got a very, very special guest, my really good friend, Gary Tonge. Gary makes plenty of works that are very familiar throughout the Urantia Book community, so I'm sure he doesn't really need much of an introduction. Gary, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I'm super excited for what you're doing. I'm really stoked to be a part of these conversations that are going to be bringing together various scholastic and interested people who read the UB and bringing their expertise to these conversations. So I'm really honored that you've asked me to come. But
Yeah.
great to be here.
Well, I'm honored to have you. And thanks for being here. It's your expertise is going to add a lot to this conversation. I'm looking forward to
We'll see about that.
So, today we're going to talk about extraplanetary beings that have visited our planet in the past,
Yes, indeed.
throughout history, and we might even get into, if we have enough time, beings that are visiting our planet currently. Uh,
Maybe.
this seems to be a huge topic in the world right now. The topic of UFOs, UAPs, the orb phenomenon, things like that. And it would be kind of fun to explore that topic through your Ranch Book lens.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah.
yeah. But for now, we're going to go a little ancient alien style and kind of
Yeah.
talk about some beings that have been here in the past. So the first time that we know of in the Urantia book that they visited our planet was about 900 million years ago, and
Indeed.
that was a scouting party.
Yeah. So that is very interesting to contemplate something like this. 900 million years ago is a really big time ago. And if the first thing that springs to mind when you think about 900 million years ago is, well, I mean, you couldn't even call them aliens because there was nobody here to have a comparative alien reference to. Right? So
Good point.
these beings, 24 of them in total, with a mixture of different orders of being. Some of them life carriers, which we'll probably be getting into a little bit, and then Melchizedek and Leonardex and some seraphim came to this world. It was still vigorously in formation. It was probably an extraordinarily hostile environment still, as it was still building up its mass through aggregations of matter. It was like highly volcanic still. All sorts of stuff was going on. Yet the scouting party came out to observe this particular world as they thought it was had the potential to be a stable enough environment for what they refer to in the Urantia book as a life experimentation planet, otherwise known as a decimal planet. They say decimal because it is somewhere in the region of every 10 worlds they do some type of additional life plasm alterations and upgrades as they're evolving the way that they deploy life within this sector of space. So this scouting party came out with not just to see whether this world was going to become a world with life on it, that they would implant life on it. They were coming out specifically to do checks on this sphere to see whether it could be cultivated into something with this life experimentation, which is far more complex. I don't really know what all those extrapolations are, but you could say dinosaurs might be part of that extrapolation. They had to get to a stage where they were comfortable knowing that there was going to be enough biological and stable bandwidth for them to do whatever they were planning to do in this biologic augmentation and alteration from what they'd had before. They were going to experiment on life, and they needed a good canvas, so they were here to check on that, which is really crazy to imagine to me. Because the humanity didn't exist. There's no life on this planet, and I know that human understandings of the genesis of life on this world go back further than 900 million years, but there's a reason for that. And we can maybe touch on that too. But from the perspective of the revelation, there was no life on this world. Yeah, and yet there were beings coming here, and that's kind of interesting to think about as somebody who lives on this planet. There was no life. There was not even single-celled life at this point, and yet these beings came to check it out to see whether they should do something that ended up being what we're sitting here. Look, we're having a conversation within this life that they elected to plant here. So
Yeah, and we've talked about this before because they say that there's 3 planets in our system that could potentially be habitable. Venus and Mars being the other 2. Could have been sub breathers or super breathers, and I mean, it's interesting that they chose our world. Obviously, the mid breather form of life is the most common, and that's probably what they choose. But I mean, it's still a choice, right? And so they made that choice to choose our world over those other 2 worlds, and
yeah,
that's
that's a really interesting point as well, Josh, because from the perspective of like a sub breather, which would be Mars, or a super breather, which would be Venus, Venus would have had to have been altered because it's a really problematic atmospherically, heat wise and stuff. But then that as an aside, sure, they could have easily implanted different types of life on Mars or on Venus, but because they were looking to do life experimentation, what they say in the Urantia papers is that they need I guess a more stable bandwidth of I think one of the things that would be primary would be liquid water needs to be present on the planet. So it has to be something where they can do a much broader experimentation on life. If you're in a sub breather world or a super breather world, or even further into the edge cases of non-breathers and stuff, you can't have that genetic extrapolation. So for the specifics of a decimal life experimentation world, they had to choose this world. But if they weren't looking to do life experimentation and maybe they would have chosen a different world in our system. And it's an interesting thought.
yeah,
It's obviously all in the past now. They did some
yeah,
life experimentation, and here we are talking in the middle of it.
yeah,
But interesting stuff, right?
yeah, yeah. And another thing that we've talked about in the past too is this idea of if they potentially did anything, because you got to imagine our planet looked very different from what it does now. I think at the time of this scouting party, there was just the one continent, and it was full of storms and just like crazy atmospheric weather patterns, and so they would have had to have the foresight to know that all that's going to calm down and eventually make our world. But we've talked about this, and I wonder, um, this idea of did they do anything to our planet? Did they do any kind of like terraforming
Mm.
or any weather modification or anything to kind of get it to move into the direction of a stable planet, or did they just have the foresight and know that that was going to happen?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? We'll just go forward chronology within chronologies. So you get a 900 million year ago scouting party that arrives, and they don't implant eukaryotic evolving life on this world until 550 million years ago. So there's a 350 million year gap between those things happening. So the question is, and there are a few different schools of thought on this, but I tend to lean into the possibility that they likely, alongside registering this world at the system level and then at the constellation level and at the local universe level and all the way up to the super universe level as a world that they're going to be doing this life experimentation on. They registered this world at that point, just after 900 million years ago, that they would just sit around and let automation, like you just said, are they leaving it because they know it'll somewhat stabilize? Or some of the other conversations that happen with UB students who are interested in this type of subject, were they leaving behind little mechanisms that were like a prokaryotic cells that might be able to terraform and alter the atmospheric conditions somewhat over a really long period of time. So they drop them there, they leave it, knowing with probably some minor level monitoring that it's going to be building a more favorable environment, along with the world stabilizing anyway, which is part of the process of these what spheres we're on. They're aggregations of matter, but along that process, were they doing something actively for those 350 million years? And I kind of think that they probably were, but they don't say anything definitive about it. I think that the authors of paper 57, that when they're referring to a scouting party coming out and then making all the administrative decisions and speaking to the greater universe about the destiny of this world as a world that will have life on it, it seems weird that they would just walk away and leave it. It strikes me that if life is organized, if life is carefully designed and deployed, and it's really thought through, that you would, in the preamble to launching that carefully thought through life, that you would also be doing curation on the environment, because otherwise I don't know, it just seems like something from nowhere. And I'll build onto that as well, because I think where human science looks into history and believes that life started a long time before, and then there was an event which is exactly in key to what the Revelation says 550 million years ago, called the Cambrian explosion, where all of a sudden this vivacious amount of life appeared. Before that, they see evidence of life, and I think it's normal for human science to see this explosion of life 550 million years ago and then draw a gradient back and think, well, how long was the life lingering there before it did this sudden explosion? They don't know that the life that exploded was delivered and implanted and then it did that. They just wonder, how can something like that happen if there was nothing coming from before? And you can see why they draw the line back, 1 billion or 2 billion years, because they're trying to work out how there could have been the potential for a sudden explosion of life types. So I think that there's evidence for there being this a prokaryotic life, which is a little mechanisms that just repeat themselves. They don't evolve. Bacteria is a good example of that sort of stuff. Now, and they could easily be designed to do certain things to the atmosphere. And we could hypothesize, and I'm probably riffing a bit here, but if they did the same to Venus, for instance, because Venus is really, while it could be a super breather world, it's incredibly inhospitable and is outside the bandwidth where you could put a super breather. It would need significant alteration to those atmospheric conditions for it to be okay. I think, anyway. It certainly doesn't look like a pleasant place to be. And so that's the hypothetical: is, were they doing something? And I kind of think they were. I don't know whether they were doing something actively here. I think they just deployed the little machines, you can call them, to do the job, and then they left it. A little bit like how you might put a prime rib in the oven and then leave it, right? You just have to wait for it to finish. It's same process, just to me it seems like they would have their attention on us on this planet in preparation for creating the life for this world. And I don't know, what do you think about that anyway, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you on that. I mean, it makes sense that if you had the ability, and the fact that we see single cell life go back, what, I think it's 3.5 billion years or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or at least that's what science has determined. It's like, well, where did that come from? And the idea that single cell life, like you said, it can be kind of used as like little teeny machines to make small changes to a planet over a long period of time to prepare it for the life implantation. And one thing that's really interesting to me is another thing about the 550 million years ago is they specifically say that they didn't bring life here, like everything that was made. And so you have this explosion, this Cambrian explosion. Basically what happened was single cell life went to multi cell life, and then that's what exploded, right? So it's like, what did they do to affect that change? Did they, I mean, you'd think obviously they used what was already here. So they used that single cell life that was already here. But the question still remains, was it here because it is something that exists naturally throughout the universe and it's just something that's already here? Or is it something that they planted here to get us ready for that implantation? So,
I think
like you said,
that's a good
it's
question. That's a good
yeah,
question.
and it's not really answered in the Urantia book so far that I found. Um, but there's some interesting clues in the Urantia book that um, you know, don't really answer the question one way or the other, but kind of raise more questions, which is always
I
fun
think
about
so.
the Urantia book. Is it has a tendency to do that sometimes. It
Well,
makes
they
you
want us
wonder
to
one
creatively
thing and you
speculate, right? They want us
yeah,
to. I think that from the perspective of the authors, that when they're delivering the material, they weren't allowed to over reveal because they don't want to take away our ability to speculate, which is exciting. What we're doing right now is speculating on the papers. But they also know that some things need to be put into place for us to speculate towards. So it adds to the sublimity of the writing of the papers that they've written it in such a way that it allows for speculation, but it also has these kind of anchor points where we can utilize to speculate towards. So we're trying to draw a line between what we know. It's a bit like the Michelangelo. It's like they're trying to draw a line between there so we can meet. And you see a lot of that with other subjects that we're probably not going to cover today. But this is one as well where there's a gap, and you can kind of see the human understanding of it. The kind the non the humanity that doesn't recognize that there's a living universe and we're part of that. You can see why that you would make these, looking at the evidence, the empirical evidence. You can see why they make these assertions that life came about in a certain way. One of the things I do find that's interesting to mention is that the Urantia book, and I can't remember which paper it's in actually, but I know what it says is that there's an unbelievable difference between a dead cell and a living cell. That it is like a universe in width of difference between something that is effectively a completely potentially functional cell that is not alive and then one that is alive. And part of the mystery of, like, even for terraforming life is even that life has to be invigorated with something that comes from the creative mother spirit of our local universe, specifically for our world, that transmute something from a pattern of potential life to a living life. And that difference is not possible without that life being bestowed upon it by a much higher order being. So it's easy for us on this world, this confused world, to like imagine that a friend of mine, another UB student called Chris Halverson, I used to say they went from worshipping the magic man of religion, and now secular science now worships the magic matter. Everything came up from nothing, and it's understandable why you would do that, because when you start to think too logically about it, the idea of a magic man doesn't make any sense. But then the idea of magic matter makes even less sense when you start looking at it. But at least for the perspective of trying to build a foundational understanding of life extrapolation, magic matter is a little more grounded, and you can see why they defer to that when there's no evidence of the other side of it. But what's interesting as well with the Cambrian explosion is that brings a completely different set of aliens to the planet. And those beings, as you were saying, they didn't bring a plan of life to this world. They came here and they built the pattern of this life while they were here. So extremely complicated piece of eukaryotic life, and it's not too hyperbolic to say that the life that they implanted here, this single cell with its extrapolation potentials, created every single order of life that you see, whether it be a banana or a tree or a human or a cat. It doesn't matter. All of it came from this little packet that they deployed on the planet,
yeah,
and then let it launch and also with the provisions for it to be experimental, so they were either interacting with it, or it was already, or vivid diversification was built into the original plan, and they launched it, and humans, science sees that 550 million years ago, that there was an explosion of life, and so they see this event, and that's what the Urantia Book speaks about. And it's worth mentioning that the Urantia Book was speaking about that date before that date was understood by science as well, and so it's an interesting correlation there.
Yeah.
And from that point onwards, life was an unstoppable force. It was doing everything you can imagine. Yet it's diversified into something constantly. But it's worth saying that when these beings came, these life carriers came, when they implant life, they don't do it. They might be doing a longer track thing with a life experimentation world, but the goal of any life implantation is for will dignity, sentient beings to be the end result. So that there's never a life planted on a world that doesn't have the goal of there being God-seeking, God-knowing beings who have will dignity and question who they are. That's the goal of all life. They don't do it because they want to try out a bunch of trees. That stuff is happening as part of the same process, but the end goal is humans. And it seems funny to me to imagine it, because if you just go to just look at the proto on this planet, there's just so many amazing different plants and foods that you can. The abundance of proto is crazy, and so many of them are incredible tasting, and you can combine them with alchemy or whatever to make food that we cook. The idea that that wasn't planned, to me, is ludicrous. Like, what is going on with all this food?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like everything that the things that we can eat are living things, right? I mean, there's not really anything that's non-living that we can actually eat to sustain our energy.
No,
and
that's
so
right.
these all have grown and evolved to and not to get too far in the weeds on this, but it just seems so designed.
It really does. I mean, yeah.
Right?
I mean, obviously, when people say that, a lot of there's obviously everybody's wrong. That's wrong. Say that again, Gary. When people speak about design, they often go to some sort of biblical or the world was made in 7 days framework, and that is it's understandable why that might happen, because that's the legacy of how the genesis of this world was told. But it really isn't. It's a much more complicated process. It's and it's worth noting right now that the process that happened on this world has happened in worlds all over the universe. Trillions of them, in fact, have had a similar process happen to them. It's not something that they've just tried out here. This is a process, a known process of, as you say, you're waiting for a world to stabilize. And you mentioned it already, Josh. There's a waiting period, and maybe some cultivation and terraforming going on as well. But this is not the first time they've done it. And the life carriers that did it on this world, well, they're inside of our local system, and which is a very small part of space. But there's 3.5 million worlds just in our local universe, and that's still a pretty small piece of space. They're very used to doing this. They have a much larger plan that they're doing when they don't come here and just crack their knuckles and say that's just do some life, man. They have a very specific mechanism that they're adhering to make as much biodiversity and spiritual diversity as possible in these evolving worlds. So they were very deliberate with whatever they've done here. How we've ended up being is very deliberate, notwithstanding a few of the things that went wrong in our evolution. We'll get to that. But the original ordained plan, they were very specific about it. They did this work and they launched it, this life, and the result is humanity and an unbelievably abundant planet full of beautiful life, diversity of life. And it's crazy to imagine that even if you'd be secular about it to imagine that all this came from magic mud, it's still it's
Yeah.
unbelievable. But like this at least makes more sense because uh, no matter how hard we try as human science, we can't make anything that was not alive become alive.
Right. Yeah.
It's always an interesting thing to observe that when they, if you ever see any news articles about how, or white papers saying, well, we created a different form of life. They haven't. What they've done is they've just manipulated already living life into something that's different, which it's and I think it's Stephen C. Meyer, who's an interesting scientist, but also a Catholic, and he said that they've got answers to mutation. They can kind of explain why mutation happens, but the one thing they cannot explain is why anything came from nowhere and has the ability to do it. That's where the human understanding of life runs aground when you have a genesis point. Seeing mutation and genetic alteration, you can see it all around us, and you can even look at the genome of it and you can see what's happening. But where did that come from? That's the complicated thing. Where did this huge piece of launchable data get turned into life? And that's what happened 550 million years ago when these extra-planetary beings, non-mortal beings as well, I must make sure we state, these are not people in spaceships.
These are celestial beings.
Celestial beings, yeah. Because I think that's another thing that's worth mentioning as well, that there's a kind of a thing called panspermia, which has done the rounds, and I can't remember the guy who, it'll come to me his name, or who is a proponent of it, and it's kind of it's a theory that people will like to lean into, because what it does is, from my perspective, is it kind of pushes the problem further away. They said that life came from another place, and we had, on an asteroid or whatever else, it was brought here by aliens. Well, it doesn't really matter. They're saying that life came from somewhere else, which helps explain how life suddenly appeared here. But what it doesn't do is explain how the life got to the place where it came from in the first place. But it just goes to show you, when science is really pushed as to why there's anything here, that they end up having to take it off world. They have to end up getting into some pretty complicated extrapolations and rationalizations just to make it make sense for them. And one of the things that they do is like hoik the entire genesis of it into the universe somewhere, and then it makes it. And
it came from a comet, and the comet crashed into Earth. Well, how did life get on that comet? Well, that
don't
came from
stop asking questions. And so that you could say, but I understand. One of the reasons that Urantia Book is here is to help us re-understand how life came to this world, where it's not chaos that brought it. It was, a divine plan that brings it. That we're not an aberration, that life has happened to appear on this world. It's very specific that life has appeared here. We don't know that. And part of the Revelation's goal is to explain it, that there's functional utility to all of this. There's a design for all of it. Everything is looked after. The universe is mind-made and personality managed. We don't have that understanding right now because of various reasons. But we, I believe, are on a path to having a reorientation towards that knowledge. And the Urantia Book is right now fundamental to expounding on that. This is why we're having these sort of conversations, right, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just to add to a little bit what you're saying, the life carriers, like the smallest grouping of systems is our local system, right? And just in our system, they've done it over 619 times. We were the 606th, but as a experimental planet, which is 1 in every 10, the decimal planet, they've done it. Ours was the 60th, and they've now done it 61 times. But yeah, so like you were saying, I mean, this isn't their first rodeo. They've been doing this just even in our local system, but all throughout the universe. This is the way that it's worked, and yeah. So let's move ahead and talk about this. All this was designed to lead to will, dignity, human beings. which eventually happened 1 million years ago. And
That's right. Yeah.
and yeah, and so I mean, there was probably some activity in between, 550 million and 1 million years ago,
I should
obviously.
say
Well,
so.
yeah,
Yeah.
but the next major event that happened was the human beings and an infanta, and the so that would introduce a new being to our planet, and I've wondered this, and maybe you can help me with this. That would probably be the first when they eventually grew a little older and got thought adjusters. That would have been the very first time that thought adjusters would have been on our planet, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Unless there were some of the beings that were thought adjuster equipped that were visitors, other off. But I mean, that's probably getting into the weeds with that. But from the perspective of any being who's resident on this world, yeah, and on Infanta, when they made a decision, these are the first human beings, and there's a lot we could talk about with this, but they made a decision when they were about 8 or 9 to through recognition that they're probably in danger to get away from where they were with their immediate parents, which they were a big mutation jump forward. They were a change up, and these changes had happened multiple times in the preamble to them. These two real humans appearing, they'd made a decision to leave and find a safe harbor away and build a life themselves. So a brother and a sister. And when they made that choice, that was considered the criteria for a thought adjuster, a fragment of God to come and inhabit both of them. They made a choice that allowed a fragment of the eternal Father part of God to inhabit within them. And that changed the parameters for any being from any beings that have been on this planet before. Will, dignity, thought adjuster indwelt mortals, and that and as well at that point, it was something really cool, and I think it's super cool because I come from video games and I used to love science fiction and stuff, and the Urantia book just makes science fiction seem so beige to me now because there's so many amazing things that are happening in the universe that the science fiction hasn't got an idea about. And one of the things that I really find tantalizing is when they made this decision to run away, they gained thought adjusters, but on as well as that, which is super exciting to me as somebody who likes this sort of stuff, that the beings that could see this type of stuff, which there are many orders of being here that are invisible to us, they saw a sky basically light up as the universe circuit signals were tested. So they saw this system turn on and off. They were like seeing it turn on and off, and then of course they all realized that something serious was happening. Because they'd been here on this world, these life carriers, cultivating life, working towards what would be will, dignity on this world, and they didn't have to wait very long after that. And after they'd made this decision, a decision that embraces wisdom, which only a sentient mind can do. There was a message from the headquarters of the local universe saying that this world was now. What does it say here? I have it. To the life carriers of Urantia, greetings. We transmit assurance of great pleasure on Savington, Adentia, and Jerusalem in honor of the registration on the headquarters of Nebadon of the signal of the existence on Urantia of mind, of will, dignity. And then from that point on, this world was a registered planet with mortal beings on it that had the ability to understand and find God. And at that point, the life carriers who'd been here, these off-world beings, playing with life, were told to leave it. That's the last you could do with it. You can't do anything now. These beings are here, and you have to leave it as it is. And that's kind of crazy to imagine, as you already mentioned. 550 million years ago, they launched this life, and 549 million years later, this happens.
Right.
And then the history, the anthropology of humanity begins at that point. It's like 987,000 years ago when they were born. That's when human history begins, and then the life carriers, which have been probably doing a lot of stuff we won't get into, were told to hands off. And a lot of them departed because it was a done deal. They'd reached what they needed to do with their initial life implantation. That beings of world dignity existed here, and that's, you think they're planning for that? That's crazy. They're planning for that, and not only with that plan was built into the life plasm they launched, but the timeline is crazy. We're 1/550th of the time of life being on this world is human life,
Right.
and so the amount of time they went into just getting the life to get to that point, and maybe some of the segues of decimalization of life experimentation probably slowed some of it down. It may be faster on worlds they don't do that on. In fact, I think it probably is. But nonetheless, even if they did it in half the time, it's still 250 million years. That's crazy to imagine, and how complex and patient the evolutionary process is.
Yeah.
You know, when you get stuck in traffic and you really want to get where you're going, you really should think about the life carriers' patience when they were waiting for humans to appear. Right.
Right. Right. Well, and you know, the idea that it, you know, if it might have been a little bit slower, or perhaps maybe it was even faster, because they say that one of the outcomes of this experimental life was that this was the first time that um willed will creatures came before the Sangic
Well, yeah,
colored races.
it's yeah. I don't remember the exact term on that, but it's pretty
Yeah, no,
rare.
I got it right here. I'll read it real quick. It says
Yeah, that
there
would
were
be great.
many
Yeah.
unique features of the Urantia life experiment, but the two outstanding episodes were the appearance of the Edonic race prior to the evolution of the six colored peoples, and the later simultaneous appearance of the Sangic mutants in a single family. So those are the
Oh,
two
yes, yes.
things that had never happened before that happened here.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I guess they mean that as a combo, right? The two things happening. But it is
Yeah.
interesting to note that normally, and well, let's just progress our chronology a little bit, maybe, and move forward another 500,000 years. So 500,000 years ago, as you've just already touched on, Josh, two things were happening at once. But one thing had happened much earlier, and the thing that you just pointed out is that will dignity arrived significantly before this event. Planetary administration, which is something that comes to all worlds, arrived here about 500,000 years ago. And normally, as we were just talking, will dignity normally arrives around the same time. That the administration arrives when will dignity arrives. But on this world, a heavy edge case, there was will dignity on this planet for close to 500,000 years before the planetary administration arrived. And as you also touched on, that's when there was lots of sudden types of mutations, where one particular family had 19 different children, and each of them had different skin behavior when it was exposed to sunlight. So the colored races took origin, and I think it was nowhere near where the out of Africa thing. It was like somewhere in India or something like that. Is it current India? It was in this
Yeah.
particular tribe of progressed people that this suddenly happened. But it was also worth saying that that sudden change of this sudden colored races that had an augmented genetic to the previous genetics that were on this world. Were quite far away from where the planetary headquarters was set up, which was in Mesopotamia. So there was a big distance between them, but those things happened at pretty much the same time. So it was interesting that the colored races appeared at the time of the planetary administration, but world dignity happened much before it. But bearing in mind we're talking about extraplanetary beings here, we should probably talk about a whole bunch of them coming
Yeah.
500,000 years ago, right? I
Yeah.
don't know whether you want to tee that up or I can, but it's quite something, and we're trying to keep it simple, because it's very easy to get the details muddled up with this sort of thing, because the ordained plan is that this planetary administration begins a center for cultural evolution on the planet, and there there arrived two beings. One of them is the one that mostly people talk about, but two beings of the Lananadek order, who were part of the leaders of this world's administration, a planetary prince and his first lieutenant, which their names are, or were, probably are still, Caligastia and Dalagastia, and with them came a lot of other angelic and seraphic hosts, but also the really interesting and quite close to alien framework that they brought was 100 previous mortals from different worlds, not from this world, 100 previous mortals who had got as far as our system capital, which is called Jerusalem, which, as Josh already talked about, is the parent sphere for what is currently 619 worlds. At the time, it was only 607 or so, but yeah, 607 around that time. These people had got as far as the planetary headquarters, and they'd yet to fuse with their fragment of God, their thought adjuster, and they were allowed to petition to come on a long-term mission to another world as part of this administrative staff. So it was a very long-term mission. I'm just picking a number out of the air, probably a 1,000,000-year mission to help bring about culture and evolution to this world. And they set up this city, I guess you could call it, called Dalmatia. And the idea was that they were going to slowly help, through basically revelation, increase the culture on this world with people who are favorably interested and compatible with those higher learnings. And they were slowly meant to do this over a long period of time. So you have these 100 planetary staff members who were previously mortal, who are given a mortal form on this world, and that mortal form comes from the life plasm of 100 volunteer Andonite beings, and those Andonites were direct descendants of the original two humans. And so you have these, they have these physical forms created, built for them, that they can inhabit, and they're meant to be here for a particularly long period of time. So you've got 100 beings who came from different worlds, who've come here as volunteers, and then 100 mortals who are also altered to work alongside them. So you have this kind of human hybrid bridge as part of the administration for the people who would come from surrounding areas to this area of culture and evolution. And with that came something that has been, well, it's in a lot of history and it's not particularly understood, but it's a type of shrub plant that their biological systems were altered so they could be respondent to it. And if they were to periodically eat from this plant, it sustained their system. It kept them young, it kept them virile, it made that they could live indefinitely. So,
Yeah,
and that's crazy stuff. It sounds like sci-fi, right? But
right. I mean, if you think about it, like that's not only do we have extraplanetary beings, but we have extraplanetary plants, trees.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, they've literally brought some type of and I don't know what they would have done to it. I mean, I always think about the fundamentals of getting stuff from here and back, and I imagine that it was likely a life plan that they could launch and create that shrub here. But but what is interesting, what you just said there, Josh, is that the genesis of that life plasm is a designed thing that's keyed to sustain these people indefinitely. In fact, in an indefinite sustainment, because their mission was long, and I find it so interesting to imagine that you could get as far, you're ascending up through the universe and you're on these ecstatic worlds compared to what it's like from your original world. And then you get the option to go back on a long track mission, hundreds of thousands, maybe a million years, on another world, a segue, where you go back down to a mortal world. And so many people wanted to do this, and it's obviously a really small amount of people that get to do this type of thing, right? If you're
Right.
having this planetary administration on, say, 600 worlds, well, it's only 60,000 people total in all of our system that get to do that, and it's a really
Right.
small edge case. So they chose to
Yeah.
do that. They are, in some respects, they're like extra-planetary mortals, but they had a Urantia form, a higher form. But when they came here, they were given a mortal form. And that's
Yeah.
what this tree of life, the shrub of adventure, as it's referred to, was used to service them for the long period of time of what was meant to happen would be a sustained and gradually evolving culture that was led by Caligastia and Dalagastia, which didn't go to plan. But,
No. No.
and there are other beings as well. I mean, you can touch on that. There's other beings that came along with that. It's actually, well, what I just want to say about it is it's so amazing how much of this is the complexity of what they deploy is planned. There's utility for all of these decisions. And one of
Yeah.
the thing that I always remember is that, worlds don't evolve unless there's revelation, whether it be internal revelation given to you directly, or whether it be apocryphal revelation, which is the larger information that the Urantia Book is the fifth of, and Urantia Book is an interesting revelation because normally apocryphal revelations come as beings. They gave us a book, but bearing
Yeah.
in mind how we dealt with the fourth apocryphal revelation, which would be Jesus, you can kind of understand why there's not many volunteers to come here and
Yeah.
cohabit. Right? It's difficult to throw a book in jail.
Right. Yeah. 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 And it's interesting. The 100 is so fascinating because I mean, superheroes are like a big thing in modern culture right now. But these were like real life superheroes. I mean, they lived for a very long time. They were basically immortal. Um, and you know, beings who have already advanced to, this Marancha state in Jerusalem, and then came back and to a primitive world,
Yeah,
and so I mean, basically, they're like all powerful. That's why they call them superhuman, right? Um, but they weren't there to fight great war. They were there to uplift humanity and to teach the natives and the primitives about God and about different things. Teach them language, hygiene, basic hygiene. Just the simplest forms of starting an advanced civilization. And you know, I see why there's such an appeal to do that. I mean, that sounds awesome. Like I would I would volunteer for that to go back to a world in its
you're not the
primitive
first
stage.
UB student in our cohort that said that. That something that I'm not sure about, but I know other people that really contemplate it. If they get a chance, that they would do it. Right?
Yeah.
You've got to meet a certain framework as well, and that gets a bit technical. You have to have not fused with your thought adjuster, and to get to Jerusalem and not have fused with your thought adjuster is probably a bit of an edge case too. There's either something interesting going on with you, which is allowing you to not be fused yet. It's not something that there's the subset of people that could put themselves up for it is a small subset, I would imagine. I don't know what the ratio of people that get as far as the system capital without fusing is, but I imagine it's a 1,000 or a few thousand to one. Most people would be fusing, going through the mansion spheres.
Yeah.
there's some, you were talking about superheroes. You can see, and it comes from a lot of this history, and some of it we're going to get into in a little while. You can see why there is a legacy of a pantheon of gods, or this superhero sort of ethos that comes from different parts of the world, and a lot of it is generationally passed down fables and somewhat distortions of the actual existence of these people on this world a long time ago.
Yeah.
And because we haven't got any evidence of it now, except in the Urantia Book, which is explaining what was, and what could have been and what is. A lot of people lean into these things, and it's interesting to me as well that so many people just love the idea of a superhero, or somebody who can be assist humanity in a greater way, because what's happening on this world is we don't have that yet. From the perspective of us as growing, evolving mortals on this world, we should have that, and the fact it's not there is we're reaching for it even though it isn't there. And I think it's very interesting to see that people still lean into that, because they're looking for that that which should be here, but we've been left without it because of certain circumstances. So the superhero thing is very interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And before we get further ahead and talk about how um those 100 have entered our mythos, we
Yeah.
should probably talk about the primary midwayers that came about
Ugh.
around this time. And
Yeah.
that's an amazing story in itself.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I guess, if it's okay, we could talk about the primaries and midways and secondaries at the same time, because the midways are an order of being which has, well, the primaries are a little different. The way that your Urantia book describes the primary and the secondary midwayers. Midway means midway between humanity and celestial or seraphic. So the primary, the Urantia book says they're much more like seraphim than the secondaries. The secondaries are more like us. So neither of them is exactly midway. One of them is 1/3 this way, and the other one's 2/3 this way. Is how I see it. Right, the secondaries are more. The secondaries came much later, but the primaries came as part of the prince's staff, and the prince's staff procreate's the wrong word. They procreated in one way, but there was a mechanism that took place where, when they were having these children were not human at all. They're energized completely differently. I would say they're energized like a seraphic being, a celestial being. They could move really fast. They didn't need food, none of those things, and they're invisible to most people as well. And 500,000 years ago, at the genesis of the planetary administration, these events happened, and there were in total 50,000 primary midwayers, and those primary midwayers were here to assist the other work that's happening, whether it be messaging or helping get people to come in the right direction, to bring them towards this center of culture, because the whole plan was to slowly build out this culture like in a concentric circle outwards over a long period of time. And on a normal world, that is what they have. Those centers of culture don't disappear. They end up just being the genesis point of that, of something that persists. That didn't happen here, of course. But the midwayers are they're kind of inexplicable. You've got these off-world beings who've been given human forms that are keyed genetically to be like the human forms here. They have an ability to be sustained here, and their progeny are not human in the slightest. They're close to us. They say close cousins, I think, but they're completely different to a mortal being, and they take their genesis. They're born, and they have a beginning on this world, but they're not human at all. And many of them are still here, doing, the ones that are still here are doing good.
Yeah.
But it's actually really, it's really outside of our frame of reference to imagine that invisible beings that are sustained by the energies of the universe were born here. But
Yeah.
that's what happened.
Well, and all of them would still be here if it wasn't for a certain event that we should probably talk about.
We could do a little bit of talking about it. It's so that, Josh, Josh was one of the people who really helped make a video that we published last year, and it's called Our World, Our History. And the it has a bit of a V shape. It goes down and then it comes back up. The narrative does, and the bottom of the V shape was the negative extrapolations that came from what is referred to as a planetary rebellion. That rebellion had its genesis at the system level. It was another order, another Lananadic order of being, which the Urantia Book refers to as Lucifer. And Lucifer is a known name if you're a biblical student, or it's just a known name in the zeitgeist. And his immediate assistant, his second in charge, who was a different being, but also the same, a word that we use for the devil, called Satan. And Lucifer, and we don't want to belabor this too much, decided through corruption, through being egoic and arrogance, decided that he thought he could do a better job of running the system of worlds that he was administering to. So 607 at the time, ours being the second youngest. He thought he could do it better than the preordained plan for the universes in general. And he decided to send Satan out to the various different worlds that were inside the subset of our local system to see whether any of the planetary administrators, the planetary princes, would go along with this. Satan managed to get 37 of these planetary princes to agree to go into sedition against the ordained plan of evolution. And you can guess what's coming. Our planetary administrator, Caligastia, was very keen to do that. It's interesting because Caligastia really wanted to be an administrator on a decimal world. Yet when push came to shove, he seemed to be very willing just to go along with Lucifer's plan of accelerating the evolution of worlds. So he really went back on what he originally wanted. And they had this kind of, the easiest way to say it is deranged idealism about speeding up evolution. And he went along with that, and stood in Dalmatia and made this proclamation that he was going to be the god of Urantia, or whatever the hell he said. And he was making this proclamation. The same communication system that had been turned on when Andon and Fonta were made that decision to run away. 500, no, actually much longer than that, 800,000 years before. That planetary connection to the local system was cut off, and all the beings that were here saw it happen, and pandemonium started to play out. At first, according to the Urantia Book, their decision to accelerate evolution on this world was going pretty well for like 40 years or so. It was going pretty swimmingly. So they were advancing. They were giving, because these beings, the planetary staff, all these, they have much higher understanding of culture because they're coming from Jerasin. They're instructed to start doing more accelerated work, and the ones that went along with Caligastia, which was 60 of the 100, they were doing this, and they thought it was going great until it went very badly wrong, and the people that were living further out did not like what was happening, and they were much more barbaric, and they stormed the city and destroyed it. And it did enormous amounts of damage to this world's progress. And they say that within 1,000 years of the events of our planetary rebellion beginning, within 1,000 years, 300,000 years of progress had been lost, and that was 200,000 years ago. I mean, this sounds like a space opera. In fact, I think that's the line we used, right, for the beginning of Our World of History. Some of this narrative sounds like epic space opera, because it does.
Some of this narrative may seem like an epic space opera. It is not.
The problems associated with human existence on Urantia are impossible of understanding without a knowledge of certain great epics of the past, notably the occurrence and consequences of the planetary rebellion.
This is our world, Urantia, our home among the stars. However, we are in chaos, and we can feel it. Despite this, we have not been abandoned, and we are not alone.
But there's so much legacy to show these events that is actually just passed on, even though it's somewhat vague in human history and anthropology and archaeology, that it's easy to see how you could draw those things together, particularly if you're trying to study the revelation along with that. And the reason that we have difficulties here is because of those events, and those events have an impact on the things that came after here as well. And we can talk about that too. But we had a cataclysmic failure of celestial administration. It should have been very different to what it is. In fact, we've got no idea what it would be like. I think if we could see what it's like on a normal world, we'd be humbled and aghast at what it's like here. And that doesn't mean to say it's hopeless here. And it's worth saying that they didn't interfere and try and stop this from happening. They actually want, through experiential tribulation and difficulty, to overcome this rebellion, or the repercussions of this rebellion, in a slow and careful and evolutionary way. And the way I often talk about it is they don't want us to shortcut our way out of a problem that was caused more or less by an attempt at shortcutting.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, it's like, oh, that's so what they're doing is they're letting this evolutionary process play out. And we've had a lot of other celestial assistants, which we're going to get into in a little while. That and one of these pieces of celestial assistance is an unbelievable piece of assistance that we were given. And one of the reasons we got that celestial assistance is because of the difficulties this world is going through. But yeah, more aliens.
Yeah. Well, you have a chart in your video, that kind of shows this idea of it going down, but then
right.
it increases and not to talk about the rebellion too long, because we can literally talk about that for hours. But it's not the focus of this video. So we'll move on to it's nice to have that in there as a point of reference, because a lot of things that we're going to talk about from here on out have been affected by the rebellion, or have happened in response to the rebellion, or so having
and the leaders of the rebellion are aliens.
Yes. Well, extra-planetary beings. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just thought it'd be funny, but we can cut that out.
No.
But it's it is because they were the beings with the authority to be doing this sort of work, and the worlds have to be gently ushered into progress, and the contravention of that is against the divine plan that works beautifully. All worlds come through barbarism, as they're evolving. But there's no reason for us to be still suffering like we are, because we were punted back 300,000 years, 200,000 years ago. But that's it. There's nothing we can do about that now. What we can do is work across that knowledge and move us back towards an orientation towards universe normalcy and understanding the things that we have up until more recently not being able to know. And part of the Urantia Book's mission is to allow people to know that, to acknowledge the problems that persist here, so that you can operate to overcome them. Because you can't work on a problem you don't know exists.
Well, it's also interesting to point out that 200,000 years ago, it pushed us back 300,000 years, but 300,000 years before that is when they got here. So basically what they're saying is we're just, just as well off at that point as if they never came. Right?
That's pretty harrowing to think about. But yeah, I mean, the way that they talk about it in the book is like, and they're measured and they don't use hyperbole. Yeah? If they use definitions, they mean it, and the way that they express the events, it's as bad as you can imagine. It's a bit like going really fast in a car and then letting go of the steering wheel and punching the accelerator and close your eyes. I mean, that's literally what happened.
Yeah.
And the extrapolation from that is we're on a world, and it's this is hard set history now. It's 200,000 years ago with the beginning of the overcoming of this began. It's not something we can undo. It's not something they want undone. They want us to work with this and go. There's a sublimity to us overcoming the problems on this world in the way we are. We're an edge case, and we are supported. There's celestial assistance to help us do this, even though there's been big aberrations that we've had to deal with as a humanity on this world that continue. We will make it to the same destination that a regular world will. We're just going to be doing it in a much more vivacious and curvy and at times spicy path. Right. And I think anybody who's listening to this conversation knows what I mean by spicy path. we all live here, right?
Yeah. And so let's move on and talk about so evolution had been continuing on, and in about 40,000 years ago it got to a point where it had pretty much reached like an apex of biological evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens on a planet, it actually is it that has to happen on a normal planet before they send the material son and daughter, or
what they normally do, so I trying to simplify it, obviously it's always worth saying that no matter which student you're talking about, we all have somewhat of a partial understanding of the papers. We're always working to improve our understandings, and we work as teams, right, to try and study this stuff. But from my recollection, to try and simplify it, is the regular deployment of what is they call them an Adam and Eve, but technically speaking, they're biological uplift beings. They are deployed to a world when the life plasm that was implanted. We were already talking about this 550 million years ago, and it turns to world dignity. They deploy a biological uplift at the point when that original life plasm has run to a point where it's no longer making any significant progress. It reaches an apex of its of that life plan. So the biological uplifters, which are coming from Jerusalem, from the system capital, they come here and they're given physical forms as well. A physical form that is compatible with the life of this planet, but that physical form has significantly augmented genetics that is compatible with this planet. So it's like I guess the easiest way to explain it would be whatever the apex is, they bring augmentation to a maxima that is compatible with that apex. And the mission of these biological uplifters is I think is originally intended to be about 5,000 years, is for them to have children and the children to have children. And they build up what the Urantia Book calls a seventh race. You've got the six Sangit races, and then you have this Adamic race. And when there's enough of them, and I think if I recall, their plan is to have about 1 million of them. And you remember, there's a lot less people on this planet 40,000 years ago. And then they would go out into the world and start mating with the general population, and that genetic upgrade would be passed on to all the progeny of these people. So it's a long-term plan, and it takes a lot of patience, just like what the planetary administration was meant to do. So they come here, they bring a higher created form of the genetics here, and then they're meant to deploy it. And it's really interesting because I'm pretty sure that you're going to have a conversation with somebody who has some good information on this. So I don't want to, I don't want to tread on his, I'll just say his name, Halbert's feet here, because he's got way more understanding on this. But I'd rather him speak about it rather than me. There is a legacy that is seen in anthropology and genetics that was left behind by their defaulted and abruptly halted plan. I'll just talk about it from the perspective of what happened. They came here. They'd been told how difficult it would be. They'd also been told that what's the word they used for Caligastia and Dalagastia, that they were still here, these two beings, and they were, they were still vectored towards whatever the hell their version of the plan was. So it was quite a significant period of time that happened since the rebellion began, but they were still here. And apostate is the word they use for them. And they came to a rough plan of what happened immediately. They came here, they were shown around, and by the end of the first day, they couldn't believe how bad things were, because they were just not ready, even though they'd been trained heavily about it. So anyway, they got along with their business, and they were doing the best they could. And you can see where some of the biblical conflation comes with Adam and Eve. They made a mistake. Their Caligastia actually created the circumstances to trick Eve, the female of the biological uplifters, to mate with a higher human being rather than continuing just mating with Adam, and it caused their mission to default. She did it, and then they because she defaulted, they made her like that she wouldn't be. She was no longer going to persist here for all the period of time. She was humanized, basically. And Adam was so bereft that had happened to her. He did the same thing, so they both defaulted. But the thing that's so crazy about this is I think they'd lasted about 140 or 150 years before they were tricked into what caused this default by somebody who's supposed to want fast advancement. It's pretty obvious at that point that Caligastia was not operating on I want evolution to happen quickly, because he went out of his way to decimate this process, right? That's an iniquitous act, right? When he was doing that, there was no way that his original idealistic plan that he liked to proclaim on the day of the rebellion, there was none of that intact. He's just trying to do damage, and he did huge damage. And they made this huge mistake, and then they spent the next 400 years in very difficult circumstances trying to just make up for that. The heroic nature of their life after they made that mistake is not something I want to get into, but they is very emotional to read, and they left behind quite a lot of progeny, and as one of your interviews that's coming up will be able to explain some of the technicalities of that, and but the biggest issue we're left with is that we still have far less than ideal genetics. Our longevity, if the Adam and Eve, if the biological uplift had worked properly, the longevity would be 300 or 400 years for a human. And there's significance to this, because if this world was stable and people had longevity up to 300 or 400 years, there's every chance that you could fuse with your thought adjuster before you died. And on normal worlds that are progressing, that becomes common. We don't really have that much time to do that. And we're also dealing with the fact that the world's very difficult. So we don't have enough time to get our feet under ourselves. We don't really get the opportunity here to become more synchronized with our adjuster and avoid mortal death. So that their failure was significant, but they did the best to mitigate for that afterwards. But we are left with a legacy of let's just say average genetics.
Yeah.
But part of their mission here was also the creation of the secondary midwares. So, like the primary midwares.
Yes.
and that's interesting too. So it was the first, I think Adamson, who's the first of their children, he had children. It gets very complicated. And those children, when they were having children, had these midways. And there were 1,984 of those. And just to sweep back into the problems of the rebellion, quite a lot of these midways were confused through sophistry into going along with the apostate planetary prince and his nefarious counterpart. And there are not, they lost, a lot of them got lost, and I don't know what's going on with them, but they were taken off planet more recently. And the secondary midways were hit pretty badly, but the primaries are hit worse, I guess, because they were around at the time of the rebellion. Like almost 4/5 of the primary went into confusion. I can understand why you would, if you're a being that's created on a world, and then the being you're supposed to rely on is saying a bunch of stuff that you know, why would this person lie to you? You could see why these lower order celestial beings would get confused. But there's a fun little nugget for anybody that sees this phenomenon. The secondary midways from the 1,984, a number of them went astray, but the amount that stayed loyal is 1,111.
1111.
1111. So, and as our boy Shane has a podcast about it, it's something, the phenomenon that a lot of people see. And these secondary midways, which are still present here, these 1,111 midways, they are the sort of beings that will directly interact with humans. And, you know, I know evidence of that. And they're the progeny of extra-planetary beings that came here to create an uplift, which malfunctioned, went into default. And that just compounded the problems of the rebellion. It was like one thing after the other. And we're living with the legacy of that too. And that put us into a situation where there had to be some critical action to keep this world evolving. And don't want to make it sound too hyperbolic, because it's not. They knew they're allowing things to go the way they are, and when they are doing these interactions to help correct things, they're not doing it because they're frightened of it going out of control. They're doing it to extract the maximum experiential wisdom through the evolutionary process without letting it completely go off the cliff. And so sometimes when we're seeing it's very frustrating and horrifying to be on this world. There's a lot of awful things happening to a lot of people, and they're not like the beings that oversee this world are not gleefully looking at those events, but they're allowing for these evolutionary processes to take effect. When you see bad things happening, good comes to meet the evil, and they don't. While they don't want to shortcut us out of it, they are definitely willing to work with anybody who's trying to improve the situation, and that includes every single one of us in every single day of our lives. That we can be desirous to help. It doesn't, and we can't undo the past. We're working with this legacy. We have short longevity. We have a pretty secular society right now, but they're not worried about that. It's going to be rekeyed, right? And that's and we can be part of that rekeying.
Yeah.
But yeah, very, very exciting stuff. I'm excited to hear your conversation with Halbert about it, because I know he's got even more than his published material. But there's a lot of evidence of this, of their presence here. There's a lot of evidence, and a lot of and I think Derek Samaras would say this. The Sumerian texts talk about kings and queens that live for like 200 or 300 years. Well, those beings are carrying the genetic legacy of these early Adamic beings. So for quite a long period of time after their original default and them being here, it took a long time for their genetics to be diluted down, so it ended up being like a sort of 80 or 90 year lifespan. For a period of time, there were a lot of people roaming around that lived for a significant period of time. In fact,
And
And
then the Sumerian texts talk about the Anunnaki, and I mean that's traced to the 100.
yeah,
And Derek Samaras and Chuck Thurston did a really great video
fantastic
on that.
video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean it's amazing how so much of this stuff still exists in our uh oral history and our mythos through
Yeah.
just very very different and unique places, but it all ties in together. And it's
Absolutely.
even like when Chuck found that I forget his name off the top of my head, but it was like Barbasos or something like that, or
Yeah. Yeah.
Barbaros, or
Barbaros or something. Yeah, I know what you
yeah,
mean. Yeah.
yeah, and how that, like, his writings, and he actually found his writings through an ancient text, and kind of just
Was
copied
it
it.
Barbosa? Is it Barbosa?
Or Barosis,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe Barosis. Yeah.
Barosis, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't
So,
remember off the top of my head. It just kind of
but
came to me, but
incredible correlation in that writing.
yeah, yeah. And so much other stuff that's been found, and maybe who knows what hasn't been found yet. I mean, there's still probably a lot out there that hasn't been found. um it's just amazing. And you know there's some great things that happen coming up, and you were mentioning me doing a video with Halbert
Mm-hmm.
um
Exciting.
about Adam and Eve, but he's not the only one that I'm doing a video with around that time. And I also got another video that is coming up that actually uh, progresses our timeline here really quick. But before we get into that, I need a quick break. I don't know about you, but I
Yes,
need
I
a
do.
little snack. My stomach is
I
won't
don't know
stop
about
growling.
snack, but I need to stretch my legs. You can see me
Okay.
fidgeting.
So we'll take a 5-minute break, and we'll meet back here, and then we'll continue on with our
You're going to
story.
just keep it running, right? Keep the recording
Yep.
running.
All right, and we're back. All right, so we had just got done talking about Adam and Eve, and there's so much to talk about there. But let's move ahead to uh, Melchizedek, which happened about 4,000 years ago.
Another extraplanetary being, by any chance?
Yes, yeah.
An
And
order of being called Melchizedek, which is a pretty high order being for our local universe. Yeah. Do you want to lead on it, and we can talk about a bit more about it? Because I know somebody who's making a pretty cool video about Melchizedek.
yeah, I'm excited for that. And
Can't wait to meet this guy.
yeah. Yeah, and Melchizedek, he was sent here to uh uplift us spiritually, um and kind of pave the way for a future revelation that we're going to talk a lot about.
Huh?
But he materialized on earth as a man of the realm, which I always find really fascinating. I I kind of think of this idea of materialization, Star Trek, and like beam me up, Scotty,
Right.
and
Yeah.
transporting, and so this idea of this high celestial being materializing on our planet as a man of the realm is very, very fascinating. And he lived on our world for almost 100 years. It was like 96 years, I think, or something like that. And yeah, when he came, we had kind of, since the times of Adam and Eve, we had spiritually declined, and we were basically forgetting about God and our uh our higher order of beings and our place in the universe, and he came here to remind us of that and kind of set us back onto the right track. So it's always really interesting that these beings, their overall goal has always been to help us.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the rebellion and because of the default of Adam and Eve, we didn't get all the help that we should have or could have. But they keep trying. They keep trying to help us and guide us and get us on the right path. And Melchizedek really was successful in that in a lot of ways. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And you know, he set up schools, and his teachings spread from the Mesopotamia area to the east and north, and just all over that area, and some of his teachings still exist to this day on our planet. And um yeah.
It's interesting because like his mission is considered an emergency um, revelation, epochal, the third epochal revelation, an emergency. But in a lot of respects, but sometimes think we conflate emergency as in like a Blue Star special where everybody's like running for the hills, or you've got to get there really fast. But I think emergency is more like emergent. They understood that they needed to put into place foundations for something that needed to happen, or they saw degradation, and they scalpel like chose for him to materialize here and build out, rebuttress the understandings in a way that had kept religion and faith alive on this world. Not because they could easily do that, but the interesting thing and the important to remember is that it was never in danger of being lost, even though they say if it was in danger of being lost if they hadn't intervened. And he didn't come here and offer some out of this world concept. He met the moment, he met the people of the moment, and keyed his teachings to be relevant to the people 4,000 years ago. And as you were already inferring, his teachings created a huge impact. I mean, and in fact, they are the base of the Abrahamic religions. So you want to think about Islam and Judaism and effectively Christianity from Judaism. His teachings were the inspiration behind what has come with those. Of course, Judaism was much sooner than Islam. Islam's a newer religion, and Christianity stemmed from Judaism. But those teachings are from Machiventa Melchizedek and his borderline 100 years of interaction with this world. And he knew very precisely what he was trying to achieve, and he achieved it. And after being here, is it 96, whatever years he was here, he went back to his brothers, his Melchizedek brothers. And Melchizedeks are interesting without getting into the technicality of it, but they can change their form. And although he didn't change his form to look like a human, he actually was incarnate. So he was eating and drinking, which must have been pretty unfamiliar to a higher being. He made himself a literal human. And there's a really fun piece of information, and I think maybe you're covering it in the video or not, but I don't know, where they say that he was taken back away again, because I'm sure people were curious why he wasn't really aging, but because he would have had very high order genetic pattern to keep him sustained. But they said that they took him, he was taken back away after 100 years before there were any signs of any degradation of his life system. Yeah. So it's like this guy appears, he spends 100 years here, and he leaves spick and span just like it arrived. It's like, yeah, that sounds like some pretty good genetics, because and he came here to be effective, and we can bridge this into one of the things that he was doing as an off-world being, bringing an understanding of the universe and of a loose understanding of the definition of God. And he would refer to the Most Highs. When he was talking about the Most Highs, he's actually referring to technically the Verondadeks, who oversee the constellations. A constellation is the headquarters of 100 local systems. We're being in one of the local systems, right? So he was talking about the Most Highs. he was doing that to build on a framework that allowed for another epochal revelation to come. The one that is, well, it really is incredibly significant, particularly that the being that came here could only do it once in all this local universe, and Melchizedek was working in preparation for that, knowing that was coming. In fact, they knew this epochal revelation that was coming. They knew that was going to happen around the time of Adam and Eve. So it was a long-term plan. So when they say emergency, I think they know something. It's a little bit less of an emergency than trying to get to the store before it shuts to buy some bread. It was like a little bit more longer term. But that's not to say that there wasn't a problem, because there was. And let's roll it into the magnificent extra-planetary being that came here afterwards, known in the Urantia Book as Michael of Nebadon, an order of being called a creator son, who co-create entire local universes with their mother spirit partners. Him being a roving and movable being, he can go around and do stuff, and her being a ubiquitous presence within the perimeters of our local universe that will, when it completed, embrace 10 million mortal worlds. It currently embraces about 3.4 million. And as part of Michael learning to have sovereign understanding over what he has co-created, he had to understand all of the orders of being that were working underneath him. He had to have a framework understanding of that. So he had 7 different bestowals. And this Michael the order of Michael is a being that comes from the central and perfect universe, from the Isle, in fact. So is a direct representative of God the Father and God the Son, primarily the Father. And his previous 6 bestowals are very interesting, and they encompass some of the types of beings that we've talked about, Lananadeks and ascending beings, and lots of very interesting missions that he was on in these bestowals. But his last and final bestowal, which accumulated with him understanding this local universe to the point where the Father, God the Father, recognized him as sovereign of this local creation, was to be born on a mortal world as a baby of a woman. And when he did that on this world, he is commonly known as Jesus or Christ, depending on how you want to talk about, or Joshua ben Joseph. But whatever the fundamental impact of him on this world has changed everything forever. And what's incredible for us is he chose this world. He very deliberately chose this world. He chose this world because it was the most challenging of all the worlds that he had in his purview. So out of 3.4 million worlds or so, this is the one that was the most challenging. And from his perspective, as this incredible being who is looking to do the most good for the longest time, he chose our world because he saw the most vivid canvas for action in all of his creation. And when he came here, it's commonly known that he was celebrated, called Master, but he was also arrested and crucified, and then started reappearing in a resurrected form. That's kind of commonly known. There's lots of overlap with the Bible there. But from a technical perspective, this is the co-creator of our local universe, a being that comes from the perfect Isle of Paradise, the phrase they use in the UB, a being from near eternity and perfection. And the apex of his learning, the maximum of his learning, was to be a human being just like we are. And there's a simpatico there about that, because our ascension from this world, our apex, the maximum that we will reach, is to stand in the presence of the Father on the very isle that Michael comes from. So he did the opposite path to us. his maximal learning. He learned something. He learned many things in his life here that somehow completed his understanding of his co-creation. And I think it's so sublime to recognize that he may have come from on high, but he was only truly great when he came down and was effective down low. And I just love that. When they're talking about the Last Supper and he's washing the apostles' feet and they don't like it, and he's trying, and they just don't get what he's trying to do. What he's trying to say is, I will lift you up from the bottom of your feet. That's true service. And he came here and did this unbelievable human act of service to everyone that he met, while also being a composite of a creator son and a human being, and slowly understanding as he grew as a child that he was not just a regular person, but he still stayed true, led a human life, and left behind a legacy that was so strong that it altered the planet's destiny forever. And he also left behind an augmentation to the way that we can conceptualize and spiritualize and think, which is also something that's in the Bible called the Spirit of Truth, which augmented our... The thing is, it's interesting because we don't really understand what it's like to not have it. It's there, it's across the planet now. But it'd be very interesting if you could flick it on and off to feel how different it would be, right?
Right.
Because the interesting thing about after he ascended at Pentecost, I can't remember who it was who was talking. There was a bunch of believers all in a room, and the Spirit of Truth appeared during the time they were speaking. Everybody in the room felt something happen, and it was like they were filled with something that they knew wasn't there before. And I think it's really fantastic to imagine that. And this is a being that chose us out of, it would be 10 million worlds, but 3.4 million worlds. He chose us because it was the most difficult place to come to, but also it was the most fantastic challenge for service for him. And when I read about that, when I think about a being choosing to do that and the difficulties he went through, it is a call to action for me to recognize that if he can find utility and hope and desire to be of service here, then we all can, because yeah. I always joke about the fact if we could be taken to a more advanced ward, I'd be pretty remedial. And it's easier to stand out here, and also we know this world. We are with our hands on the ground on this world, and we can be effective here. And that's what made him the master, is that he could come here from being on so high, and then he bonds with and ends up ministering with roughnecks, fishermen. These people are tough people. He would speak to anyone from any walk of life without judgment. And if he can do it effectively, we can. Can we do it as well as he did? Absolutely not. But could we try? Absolutely so. And as much as it's we've been discussing about these different orders of extraplanetary life that have been coming to this world, and how we've been utterly betrayed and let down by some of them, and and sometimes it's just been defaulted, but we've been betrayed, definitely. We've had an unbelievable blessing by having this one extraplanetary being, the extraplanetary being in our local universe, come here and basically hang out with everyone he met and absorb as much as he could from this world and leave behind a legacy that is continuing and is retold chronologically in the Urantia Book, which is the last part of the Urantia Book is dedicated to his life and teachings, and it is an unbelievable read. Anybody who is a little unsure about how they feel about Jesus, I would admonish you to read that and see how you feel about him. And he, as he said quite clearly, I think in paper 171, that he will finish the work he started. And let's go back to being patient. He started something when he was here, and but he never intended to complete it in his mortal life. The work that he started is continuing now, and we can all work alongside him and that ongoing dynamic work to bring this world back to where it should be. he's he wants it to happen organically and slowly and evolutionary. And he didn't bring any of that high-end information and knowledge down here. He came here and met everybody where they were, and I think it's really important to remember that, because we could easily fall into a spot where, because we know a few extra things, that we start only listening to our own opinions, and we might shut down. Jesus explains very clearly through his actions and his life and his teachings, is that if you want to be effective, you've got to know where you are, you've got to know who you're talking to, and you can be effective by being a friend and a fellow and a minister, and by listening as well as speaking. Yeah. Pretty cool for somebody who is from off planet to come down and do that, right?
Yeah, well, and the fact that he chose our world out of millions. Yeah, I mean, it's like winning the cosmic lottery.
Yeah.
And it sucks that we were so bad off that he basically chose us because we needed so much help.
We're down bad, right? We were down
yeah,
bad.
we're down bad. Yeah. but the fact that he chose us, it's like that saying, well, the last can become first, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a huge uplift for our planet that still exists today. I mean, Jesus and Christianity, and I mean, 2,000 years ago, how many other stories are like last that long and have such an impact on society and culture, and I mean, you even see in current times right now we have a resurgence of people talking about and believing in Jesus, and trying to understand who he was, and like you said, if you have questions about Jesus, I would challenge you to read part 4 of the Urantia book. That was a game changer for me. I had no religious background before finding the Urantia book, and even when I first found it, I tell this story on another podcast with our good friend Shane at 1111 headquarters, and that podcast will be probably released pretty soon. But when I started reading the Urantia book, I was really interested in the science and history topics, and when I got kind of deeper into it, and I found out that there was this whole section about Jesus, and it was talking about Jesus, I kind of closed the book and set it to the side and had to take a step back and like, what is this that I'm reading? I didn't, I thought it was more of a, science or philosophical text. And I was like,
Yeah.
wait, is this like a religious text or a religious book? And at the time I reached out to Pato Bonton and Antoinette, and I remember them kind of talking me through it, and they're like, well, you should start with Adam and Eve and learn about Adam and Eve. And so I took their advice, and I read the Adam and Eve papers, and I was like, well, wait a minute, that makes a lot of sense to my, limited, no Christian background, who was probably agnostic, if anything, at the time. And after reading that, I was like, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now I want to read what it has to say about Jesus. And when I read the Jesus papers, I was reading them, I couldn't put it down. And I remember reading them with just tears
Me too.
flowing down my face, just,
I think we have a similar path as well, Josh, because I acquired the book, and maybe in a future podcast I'll talk about it when I'm feeling braver. But we acquired the book differently, but extraordinarily, both of us, but differently. And when I saw that part 4 of the book was about him, I wasn't put off the book, but I was kind of disappointed and kind of shocked. I was like, oh no, not Jesus, not Jesus, not Christian Jesus. That's what because I'm Irish Church of England originally, back in England, of course, and I kind of rejected Christianity because the atonement doctrine just bothered me very much, and I leaned into science, much like you did. I would tell people I was atheist, but really I was agnostic. I didn't understand what the terms meant. I was just a kid. But then, as you say, like, I was somewhat put off about. I was a little worried about getting to the Jesus part of the book, and they do talk about Michael and Jesus a little bit in the other parts. But by the time I got there and I started reading about him, it's a matchless life. And I just remember when I was reading it, and I don't want to be too hyperbolic, but I remember reading it and thinking, this guy was like rolling thunder. I mean, like, it's not in any way, shape, or form a meek and weak person that happened to gain people's sympathy. This is somebody who, if you were in the presence of him, you would be compelled. And he didn't do it through aggression. He did it through just being this magnificent person whose adherence to the truth and his adherence to God was unyielding. He knew that following the path of truth on this world would cause him a lot of problems, and he knew what was coming almost certainly for quite a long time. He probably knew that just being on this world put him in significant danger of like meeting with an untimely and unnatural death. Yet he still carried on fearlessly and did that. And when you read the story of how he behaved and how he acted and how he understood people and how he managed to keep his ministry going for as long as he did, it's just magnificent. And I was so disappointed in myself for being disappointed in the first place.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's how I felt.
As you say,
I was like, what was I afraid of?
But it's understandable because, like, it's whether there's people who listen to this podcast right now, they might be agnostic or secular or atheist or religionists of every stripe. There could be individual people of faith. There could be coming from an institutionalized religion, and it could be any of the many ones. Everyone's traveling through their own personal path on this kind of confused world, and there's a lot of disparate segments that don't really make much sense. This book makes sense of them all, and it is compatible with anybody's walk of life. If you're open and looking for more answers, this can do that. You don't have to give up anything to read it. You may choose to change your framework when you're reading it, because based on, as you said, when you read about Adam and Eve, you're like, that makes logical sense, because it does make logical sense that would be the case and not the biblical conflation of the same events. And that's it doesn't force anything upon you. And everybody's got to find their own way, and whether you read the Urantia Book or you don't, it doesn't really matter. I think what's most important is that if you're really looking, you can find those answers. And if you really are asking questions, the spiritual agency that Michael left here, the Spirit of Truth, will always offer you answers. And it doesn't mean to say that if you say, I really want to find God, that the Urantia Book is going to come through your window, right? Yeah, you're going to get what you need every step of the way. And if you keep pursuing it, you will find. I'm not suggesting everything vectors towards the UB either, because the will of God can be done in any earthly occupation. You don't have to be a UB student to do that. There's many people who never read the UB and they're doing unbelievably good work on this world.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who wish they could understand more about the cosmos, and we should get into some of the more interesting contemporary stuff in a minute as well. They could be looking for alien extraplanetary life, because they look at the stars. You look up at the stars and you see the Milky Way, and you're like, that we can't be alone. People start thinking in those sort of frameworks. You're like, where is everyone? The Fermi paradox, all that sort of stuff that comes with that. When you start asking those sort of questions, the truth is the universe is waiting just outside this perimeter that we have set up, waiting to disclose itself, whether it be the material magnificence of it, or the administrative magnificence of it, or the faith magnificence of it, or the true nature of God. The real meaning of the universe is all those things are waiting just behind like a perimeter, that if you start asking questions, it's there. And I think that there's more coming along, and I think we should talk on it about what we're seeing in our skies that is more traditionally seen as extraplanetary or curious inexplicable things that we're seeing that's happened, that is a gradient building up about it, that and I want to qualify this before we talk about it, is basically the same as what we've been talking about, just where we've been talking about is somewhat historic. But these beings, a lot of these beings that for instance, Christopher Bledsoe is seeing, and he says they're angels. I completely agree with him. Those beings that haven't come along for Chris Bledsoe, he happens to be the perfect agent, I think, to help people find that. He's a wonderful, humble guy, right, who gives love to the universe, and he gets that reciprocity back. Though those beings have been here for a long time, and there's historical understanding of that type of being. So I'd love to talk about the comparison between, the two sides of what we consider to be extraplanetary, and we can do that if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of qualify that, there's, we talked about a lot of the major extraplanetary events and beings that have been here for epochal revelations, but throughout history, like you said, who have been here for a very long time, going all the way back to the very first days of well, even if we go all the way back to that very first scouting party, there
Yeah,
were seraphim involved in that.
yeah.
Melchizedek's involved in that. And so they've been here for a very, very long time, these other
Mm-hmm.
beings, angels, as we call them, or high celestial beings that have been around and invisible to us, helping us all along the way. And I think, I think that portrays a lot throughout history. I mean, you obviously you hear stories of these beings in all kinds of different uh cultures and
Without a doubt.
writings and everything. There's these beings that are even in stone carvings, and like you see pictures of these. What are these winged beings, or these these uh just unique things that we call them simply angels, or celestial beings, but there's this whole hierarchy that's been here, invisible to us, helping us. And not only that, but the midwayers, who are like our cousins, who are actually born here.
Mm.
So they're not really extraplanetary because they were actually born here. um but we would consider them alien because they're so different from us, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Alien to
but
our
they're like our
concept
cousins.
is alien to our concept, and I think it's really. I love what you just said there, because I think what we need to remember is that um you know, the it's a lot of it's about conceptual understanding. If you're not ready for something, then it can feel a little worrying or confusing or frightening or alien, right? And that could just be a comprehension of a concept that you don't have. And I think when it comes to the various order of beings that we don't have an understanding of, they're not categorized. But if you read the UB, they are categorized. They don't reveal all the details, but they basically let us know that there's all this different categories of beings that have different types of work. And I think it's important to remember that on regular worlds, that these beings would be known and they would be categorized. And it would not be strange to see beings coming and going. And if you're on a more advanced world, it wouldn't be strange to see mortals from other worlds coming and going either. If you're more advanced, that's what my position on that would be. Anyway, the UB speaks to this quite verbosely, and we have a video coming out next week which touches on some of this. But it would be normal. The conceptual understanding of people being born onto a regular world would be there are midway beings, different orders of them. At this stage, there would be a present planetary administration, a planetary prince, and a first lieutenant or an assistant. There would be 100 previously ascendant beings still present here at this time. But if things, at a certain, they go after a certain period of time, they start being released when the world gets to a certain state. But let's just assume that we're in this state without all the aberrations. There would be a printer staff here, which would be half mortals that have been upgraded and half of them beings that were ascenders that came here. They would be all present. There would be an Adam and Eve here. Or you would take one look at them and you'd be like, they're not from here. All right. All these things would be understood. And so if there was activities that were going on in the sky or just generally speaking happening around us, you wouldn't be shocked by it. The curiosity of being here is that if we see anything that is not, a 747 or a Cessna, or everybody freaks out because they don't know what it is. And the reason we're freaking out is because we are not ready for that. And when people have spiritual inspiration, when we see these things, these different interactions happening, whether they be people from neighboring worlds or beings of different orders, it's spectacular and somewhat frightening to us. And I think it's important to recognize that that's not normal. What we think is extraordinary is normal in the universe. We're extraordinary because we are insulated from the truth. And I think I'm looking forward to the process of that isolation being eroded. Now, I don't know what the timeline on that the change is going to be, but whether it happens in 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years, it doesn't matter. We can work towards that as we live our lives here. That's part of the potentials of what we can do. And that's what, me and you do. That's what a lot of the people we know who are UB students are trying to do. There's many different ways of helping the world forward. And there's people who aren't UB readers doing the same thing. Because what we really need to know is that we're not alone in the universe. We have people on different planets that are similar to us or a little bit different to us. But also there's a celestial component. We need to know both those things. So, that's how do we talk around this? How do we do this?
Well, yeah. So that's the interesting thing, because the Urantia book also does, give us information about other mortal beings that are similar to us, who live on other planets close to us. We have paper 72, which describes the entire government structure of a neighboring planet, which is a very interesting read. Just understanding this people and how they do things, and that's actually given to us in a way to help us understand not only the differences, but the similarities, and they're very close to where we are at. It seems like,
they were an Adamic failure and a rebellion, and I think that's one of the reasons that they were allowed to give us that information, is that there's quite a lot of parallels that they're dealing with. Actually, quite a lot of shockingly progressive things that the more advanced continent, the main continent on that planet, are doing, that we could certainly learn from. But the interesting context is that is a struggling world as well, a post-rebellion, Adamically failed world. And they hadn't had Michael of Nebadon come to their world either.
Right.
So
they were the only one.
We're the only one. So they got that. I think they were given the authority to tell something of that in paper 72 because of there was enough similarity. And it's actually a paper that the more you read about it, the more you recognize that there's so much that we could bring into the zeitgeist. There's a lot that can be learned about ways government function and the way society functions from that paper. And it's nothing to do with like taking this world from where it is to like a light and life sphere where everything is perfect. It's just the next steps that are required are kind of shown kind of literally in that paper. And it's pretty interesting that they gave us that information. And you were talking about the other worlds. Paper 49 does a pretty good, if whistle stop, explanation of all the different types of format of mortal beings that can be implanted or living on different worlds, from extremes of like unbelievably high pressure planets or high gravity, low gravity, different types of electrical propensities, different brain types, whether it would be 2 brain lobes like ours, or 1 or 3, which is another differential. And down to different things like the main bell curve of our world is most of them are normal breather worlds. So it seems like a lot of worlds we could probably, if we could get to them, which we can't, we could probably walk around on them. They'd likely have a similar atmospheric condition. But a lot of them are like that, but some of them are in extremes, and the most extreme would be non-breather worlds. And they speak about non-breathers in a very, very interesting way, because one of the things that's really interesting to me about non-breathers is they seem to have this extraordinarily linear nature to them, that they don't have this vivacious understanding is the wrong word, vivacious attitude towards life that we do, mainly probably because the worlds that they're on are the extreme type of world that you could implant life on. If you're on a world with no air, which is what they don't breathe air, or very little air, you can't really have beautiful trees that photosynthesize. There's no reason for it, right? They say that they're powered differently and they're energized differently to us as well. And one of the things that really hits home for me is it doesn't matter how advanced those non-breathers are. They have a father fragment, a thought adjuster with them during their lives, like we do, but they're not compatible with fusing with that adjuster, no matter how advanced the world is. When they leave their world, and I presume they all must die of mortal death because they can't fuse, they awaken and they're immediately fused with a different adjuster, which is part of the spirit adjuster. So there's father fragments, son fragments, and spirit fragments, and they very explicitly can't do it. What I find interesting about that is the revelators are trying to give us information that when it comes to placing life around the universe, that they will go to the absolute extreme, to the extreme where the life that is cultivated and evolving on a world is not compatible with these father fragments. That those father fragments can be there with them, but they can't fuse with them, and it's an impossibility to fuse with them. And I think that's a really good example of how extreme they will go when they are implanting life. And from that perspective, we might be on a difficult world, but we've got a pretty favorable world for, we've got father fragments, and the fragment that is inside of you and the fragment that's inside of me is going to be with you forever, and sooner or later you're going to fuse with it. Those spirit fusing non-breathers, their father fragments are just there with them for now, gaining experience. And one day will fuse with another mortal, but they can't fuse with them. And I think it's so interesting to imagine that. And just imagine what it would be like meeting someone from a world like that who isn't used to jiggling air molecules when they speak, isn't used to hearing the birds in the trees or the wind rushing past, isn't enjoying unbelievable amounts of fantastic tasting food. There's so much narrowing that they're going through, and likely they are much more perfunctory and far less emotional as well because of that. And wouldn't that be an interesting circumstance to be able to converse with a being like that?
It very much would be, and what's really interesting is they say that we would be very interested in the non-breathers because there is a world of non-breathers in close proximity to our world.
Yeah, that's a
And
tantalizing comment, huh?
Yeah, that's a great debate in the world of Urantia Book students, because does that mean that it might be in our solar system? Does that mean it might be just outside our solar system in a close solar system? And what's really interesting to me to think about from this perspective is, like you said, I would think that they would have to advance technologically faster than a normal world or any kind of world, really, because of just from basically a survival perspective. I mean, the
Yeah.
Urantia book does tell us that they advance to create, devices or machines to protect them on the surface, but they also invent some machines that I think they use the word shunt the
Yeah, shunt
meteors.
objects.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've got no
and
idea the terror of like being on the surface of a world that has no protective combustion atmosphere.
right,
You
right,
see things,
and
I've seen a few big shooting stars, right? You see it and they rip through the sky, but what you see, which looks beautiful, is the utter destruction of something that might weigh 3 tons as
right,
it hits the atmosphere. And where if you're on a non-breather world, something the size of a walnut would be decimating to anybody in the near vicinity of it, and it because there's nothing to slow it down. Our upper atmosphere is like armor, significant armor, and we don't
right.
really comprehend it. And so, but as you say, that they have to. If they want to spend time on the surface of these worlds, they have to work out a way of protecting themselves with some type of I don't know what even the technology would be, but some ability to deflect these objects or curtail them, or maybe destroy them on impact, or it says shunt. It seems like they're trying to bounce them off something. So
Yeah,
how would you even do that? It's technology we don't understand.
right, because
Let's
we
be
can't do
honest.
it
We
right now.
certainly can't. And so
Yeah.
they have a very different set of circumstances that they are having to deal with. Things that we didn't even think. Leaning into the sci-fi thing, it's beyond science fiction. Nobody contemplates that sort of stuff, right? Nobody thinks that if that you get the science fiction always on this planet always goes for the xenomorph, or they look a little bit like us, but they've got like bigger ears, or they've got like 5 noses or whatever, right? But they don't really contemplate the potentials of like life implantation can be so vivid that they can do so. On worlds where the life divergence is as extreme as possible, because that's what their goal is to for the process of the finite universe, which is what part the evolving universe that we are part of. They want total finite expression, and that part of that expression is birthing mortals onto worlds where it's the very edge case of anything that's possible. And it really is interesting to think about when they say more than interested about the non-breathers. And one of the things I found recently, because I know we've had conversations about this a bunch of times, it's one of the things we love to talk about, but rereading the passage, they said we'd be more than interested in the planetary conduct of such a race of beings. And when they say planetary conduct, to me, and I'm just, I'm speculating here, of course, that infers that we might be able to get to their planet. Because if they're off-world, that wouldn't be their planetary conduct. That would be their explorative conduct, right? If they were coming to us, we wouldn't see their planetary conduct. We'd have to go to their planet to see them, right? It'd be like me saying to you, Josh, you understand me and we know each other really well. But if I say to you, come and see the conduct of our household, right? You would have to come here to do that. And I find that really interesting that they use planetary conduct. So particularly knowing that we don't have the ability to get very far, but we certainly have the technology to move around our solar system, even if it is a protracted period of time to get somewhere. It's interesting they use that phrase, planetary conduct, inferring that we could probably get to that planet to witness their planetary conduct. Which is even more tantalizing. Just imagine. I mean, let's just imagine it could be on any of these spheres without an atmosphere. And there's a lot of candidates that we talk about, and we made a video where Andre primarily hypothesized that it could be Ganymede, which is one of the moons of Jupiter. But without going into the details of it, but that's not very far away. We've got vessels out there. They're not humanly piloted, but we've got lots of stuff out that far, and are they waiting on a sphere that close? Are they there? I mean, and as you said a moment ago, Josh, are they hyper advanced compared to us? Because one thing's for certain, they're definitely not speaking. They have to be using telepathy. Those are very, very different beings. They could be, if their life was implanted at the same time, and it's not a decimal world, which it wouldn't be, they could be hundreds of millions of years in advance of us if they were implanted at the same time. What does that mean? You know, how advanced are they technologically? And what would it be like if you could witness their planetary conduct? What would it be like to be in the presence of a being that can't flap their arms around and flap their mouth like we're doing, and they have to talk to you by maybe connecting with you, but with looking at you, and then and speaking to you into your mind? That's a really radical thought. It's a crazy. Is it section 8, right, of paper 49? It's a really crazy section of that paper, when because they have a very separate section just for them, just for those beings. They have all these other lists of the different parameters, electrical types and spiritual types, all that stuff, and then they have a separate section on them. So they're saying something about, well, one, proximity, but other than that, how extreme that life is. And that when the scouting group went out to that world, their goal was to implant a life system that could conduct itself in the vacuum of space, and its physical form and its spiritual form would all be compatible with that. And I think that's crazy to imagine. And speculating a little bit more, a lot of people who say they see extraplanetary beings, they often say that they're kind of emotionless gray beings. Well, that could be them. There is a lot of other much more engaging beings that people say they see. That there's lots of different types of sightings of various beings by people who've had experiences of that. But that particular format, which seems to be the most common, they might be them. Who knows? I mean, there may be variances in between. We might be, who knows? Who knows what we're seeing? But a lot of people say they see these kind of quiet, emotionless, large-eyed, gray beings, and who knows? I mean, I remember talking about the technicalities of it, and I said to Andre, how would a non-breather come here? And he said, well, if you can survive in the vacuum of space, I think a moderate atmosphere like this is not going to bother them in the slightest. So they can just wander around here. They don't need to breathe. They may be. I mean, I imagine if they're used to being very far out from the star, that if they've got big eyes, that being here in daylight would be intolerable unless they wore some protection. But I don't think cold or the atmosphere is going to bother them. They're like the incredibly tough physical forms that these beings have. I can't even imagine what it'd be like, but it's just it's fun to talk about, right?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I've never really thought about that too deeply, but in depictions of the typical gray alien beings, they always have big, huge black eyes. But what if that's just a cover?
It could be.
What if that's not really their eyes? What if that's like their form of like some kind of sunglasses?
Who knows?
That they wear.
Yeah, it could be.
Their actual eyes might just be under that. That might just be,
It's an interesting thought. I mean, you just don't know. I mean, I think what I don't want to touch on this. Let's bring the potentials of like extraplanetary beings coming here and the vivacious differential of them, and just bring it back to Jesus for a moment, because this being Michael of Nebadon, who came here and he bestowed himself on this world, and his final bestowal as a human, and he's hanging around, with fishermen, and he's reeling in like a ton of fish in the Sea of Galilee, and he's going around and he's ministering to people, and he's, spitting truth and giving time to everyone, children, adults, anybody, it doesn't really matter. All the time he's doing that, at that point where he's reached, where he recognizes who he truly is, he also has a complete understanding of the 3.4 million different types of life inside of his own local universe. So we're like I just like the thinking about the hybrid of Jesus rolling around here and at the same time knowing exactly where that non-breather planet is. Right? And saying, oh yeah, those guys they're decent people. Like, and just imagine like just him on this world being a human, but at the same time having the comprehension of all that life, that he is the co-creator of the local universe where it all exists. I think that's really interesting. And, you know, who knows how long other extraplanetary mortals have been coming here. I mentioned it in the TLDR series, and I think it was in the edit. This is an interesting world, and if you're on a balanced and advanced world, you're likely to know that this world is where Michael bestowed himself. So if you're coming from a different world, you'd be like, people might want to come and see us. And I know you mentioned it in TLDR as well. It's like, but it's not the sort of place you necessarily want to show yourself because we're not particularly good at dealing with something that is outside of our frame of concept. But it is an interesting world. This is the world where Michael came and lived his life. I'm sure people, beings that are able to travel the distances to get here would really like to have a look. They might not want to hang around too long before a missile lock or something.
Yeah.
But you can see why people would be interested in this world, particularly with the complexity and difficulties we're coming through, and the very rich history we have of compensation for the rebellion. A regular world that's come through evolution unscathed and in a fairly regular way is going to find a world like this very interesting. Because we are pretty technologically advanced and also dangerously inept at knowing what to do with it, which is an extra layer of complexity that we're dealing with as well. I don't know. I find it very interesting to try to bring together the reality of celestial beings being here and occasionally extraplanetary mortals being here. I think when people are seeing a lot of stuff, it's almost certainly mostly celestial beings, particularly in this period of time where I believe that we are in the same way Machiventa Melchizedek rekeyed this world a bit more to be more orientated towards God. It's a much more complex time now, and it is a secular time where people are having so much pressure from living and surviving on this world that is very materialistic, that I think the primary thing that we would be benefit from is knowing that it's not necessarily other worlds that we need to know from primarily. We need to recognize that the universe is administered to and loving and living, and those celestial beings that people are seeing, glowing orbs and whatever, I think is part of that slow process of reorientating towards that truth. And along with that truth is those beings are going around other worlds and doing the same thing. And if you have mortals that arrive here in a spacecraft, for instance, they also those beings had a scouting party come to their sphere way before life was and worked out what sort of life they were going to implant on it. And they're being able to move around the stars now because they're more advanced. But at some point, there was nobody on their world, and that world was designated to be a place where they were going to put life on it, just like this one. It's the same thing that happens across the universe, and I find that a rewarding and edifying thing to contemplate. That the preordained nature of the way that the universe allows for evolution is everywhere in the entire grand universe. We are dealing with a particularly difficult set of circumstances with our evolution, but other than that, it's the same. And I think that's really interesting to think about. Which is why I feel when you try and talk about what you see in the sky is bounding it together into the universe. Reality is there are a plethora of worlds, and there are a plethora of celestial beings who come and go from worlds. Both those things are true. Pretty exciting to contemplate.
It is, yeah, and especially with everything being said in well, now it's national news media. I mean, 5 years ago, if you were to talk about UFOs, it'd be like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Now it's on every news channel you turn on, they're talking about UFOs.
You're a
It's like the
conspiracy
hot
theorist if
topic.
you're not talking about it now.
Right, exactly. How the times have changed like so quickly. And you know what's interesting to me though, and kind of scary at the same time is the fear narrative that is being put out there. And you hear, well, a lot of the people who are coming out are military personnel who have seen this or been a part of a program, a secret program that the government had that studied these things. Or they're talking about, we have craft, we have alien bodies, we've reverse engineered some of this stuff. We have some of our big aerospace companies are in possession of some of these craft and have already reverse engineered some of the stuff. And you talk about all this stuff about like this reverse engineering of alien technology, Cold War, that's like a secret Cold War that's going on. And you know from the military personnel, and these people are talking about it. There's always a fear narrative in terms of like, they're invading our airspace and we need to protect. We need, this is an important topic because it affects national security. Well, I mean, okay, so it for 80 years you're saying that we've known about it, but it was never important to let the world know, or the American people know, because then it didn't affect national security. Only now it affects national security.
It sounds like well, carry on with your thought, but it sounds like they're just making a narrative up to suit the circumstances.
Exactly. Well, that's where I was kind of going with this. Is it that's what kind of worries me about this whole thing is they're turning it into something that they can use, which seems very Caligastian to me in a way. Like that's like what he would do.
But it certainly seems to be preventing
to interrupt something that is actually happening, because there does seem to be something that is actually happening. But if you're trying to interrupt and deflect or deter those plans, this is the type of way you would do it. Is kind of, instead of you'd subvert them in a way that you'd use them for your own agenda instead of the agenda that they should be being used for, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, I agree with that. That's, and I think that's an interesting thing, a way to look at like something that was pushed onto me conceptually was that the people that will do the work that changes this world are going to be people who are antithetical to the people who are celebrated and known on this world today, because the control, which is just it's just the way this world is. It's not a conspiracy. It's just the way the world functions. It's rigid, and it doesn't allow for dynamicism, the dynamicism of an individual being of faith, right? As an individual, you can pivot to something quite quickly if you decide to. And I think that this obfuscation, as you're talking about, or of the reality of like maybe beings coming from other worlds, and why they're covering it up and trying to weaponize it or something in some secretive way. I think some of that will be significantly curtailed by the recognition that there's celestial ministry on this world, because that transcends the are they coming or are they not narrative. It also is because there needs to be a balance of this disclosure and revelation. We need to know we're in an inhabited universe, but we also need to know that we're loved and upheld. That this is not a chaotic set of circumstances that allow us and a few other planets to exist. This is something that's transcendent of that. And if you're saying the Caligastian part of it, if you wanted to curtail the renaissance of this world, knowing that the people on this world are loved by the universe, indwelt by God, and their brethren is scattered throughout the universe, whether they be other mortals or ascenders or celestial beings, you would try everything you can to keep that truth from coming out in a clear and concise way. And I think that there's likely elements that are, some people are probably worried about it going too fast and too wrong. I'm not saying everybody's nefariously motivated in this. It's hard to tell, but from our study of the UB, I mean, I just have this kind of balanced understanding of like, of course there are celestial beings, of course there are other people from other worlds. I mean, it's it becomes a non sequitur, and it hasn't destabilized me, and I don't think it'll destabilize anyone who's given the appropriate period of time to assimilate that type of information. I just think the world is struggling to find its way out, and I think there is evidence that why would the antagonistic presence of Caligastia and Daligastia, which we covered in our World History, why would you? That's not pretend that they're not still here and likely grasping at straws, trying to maintain their relevance here. Because if they become irrelevant, then it's over for them. In the most serious way, it's over for them.
Non-existence.
Yeah, non-existence. So you can understand why they would be flailing, and I believe they are flailing, to try and prevent the truth from coming. But they're up against countless celestial beings who are doing the will of God. They're up against a growing number of humans who are recognizing a much more complex understanding of reality, and they want and even ones that don't have that wide concept, who also are trying to do the will of God. They're in a very difficult spot. So I imagine that they'll do anything they could to slow things down, but they're not going to be successful in that effort. I think I'm excited and apprehensive to see how this expose plays out, and just I'd carry on humbly doing the work, because I don't know nothing, right, apart from what's in here, right? I have no influence. I'm just trying to be a good person, and do good work, and I like to meet people where they are. I like to celebrate the human condition and understand other people, no matter where they're from, whether they they work for the government or if they're in the military. I know these people, but we're all the same, right? We're all doing different tasks on this planet, and the hope is that we can find a way safely. And I'm certain that there's a mixture of like people really trying to do their best to make this slowly evolve. No shortcut, right? It has to be gradual. And I think it's important to remember that as well. But it's a heady conversation. And then you couple that to the hundreds of millions of years of history of people, beings coming to this world, which we started to try and loop it back. What an ecstatic narrative. We are currently at the tip of the spear of. We're here right now, but there's a legacy of hundreds of millions of years of that being the allowance of that to happen now. And it's something I often say, and we probably need to finish because you'll have so much to edit. Is that I feel, because this is Michael's world, that I think that they are they're allowing things to run and extract significant educational episodes and experience from this world. And I think in the sum total, and you probably heard me say this before, but in the sum total of when this world does meet light and life, when it finally makes it, that this will be the vanguard for the proof of the Father's plan for evolution for all of Nebadon. I think that the curvature they're running this planet on, particularly since Michael came here, is one of the most satisfying ascendancy from difficulty that will be demonstrative to anyone else who looks upon whether evolution is, if they ever doubt whether it's useful or not, you'll see it. And of course, we're a long way from that. I don't know how far away from that. It could be a million years. It could be more. But in the sum total of it, I think Jesus's plan, Michael's plan for this world, is to demonstrate that he came here as a fulcrum to help curve that round, and our unseen friends are working tirelessly with us to help bring that about. And they're not doing it in a shortcut way. They're doing it in a careful and total way, the way it's going to be done. It'll be undoable. And I think that's exciting to be a little part of as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think on that note, that's a good place to end. I just, I want to read a quote real quick from the Urantia book. I found this to be
I've heard
really...
of that book.
Oh, really? Really? Yeah. I find this to be really interesting. I want to kind of read this in closing here real quick. The privilege of intra-universal travel and observation is a part of the career of all ascending beings. The human desire to travel and observe new people and worlds will be fully gratified during the long and eventful climb to paradise through the local, super, and central universes.
Wow.
And that's a very interesting statement. That we will be, even if we don't get picked to be part of the 100 on a world, we'll at least be, because that's another being that we didn't really talk about is student visitors. And sometimes student visitors visit worlds on assignment. Sometimes they visit worlds just for leisure, just because they're curious, because they want to visit the world. And maybe that's some of the orbs that are being seen as just student visitors.
Who knows?
Just like, hey, how's it going, guys? We're just here to check you out, see how you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's wonderful to be here at this quickening, right? This activation of the world. Yeah, and that's a great passage. I'm going to look that up. That's one I'd forgotten. Because it's a little bit simpatico to the video that's coming out next week as well. But I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you. This is a tricky conversation because there's so much, and sure, you can augment it with visual aids and stuff like that to show this stuff, but it's a hard conversation because it's so long and complex and turbulent, and it also sounds like the science fiction narrative. So somebody who might be passively listening to this podcast might be thinking, what are these people talking about? But when you start to lay it down and lay it across known human history, you start to see a pattern forming where we have things that we're missing, and there is a history behind it, and that history has been revealed. And they've so skillfully wrote the Urantia book to make sure that we can still do that reaching, but they have those anchor points that we can connect to. There's certain things we can't find unless they tell us, right? There's lots of hidden history that they've had to retell in part 3, for instance. And that stuff is going to be really useful in the next few hundred years as people start to leverage on this material more and more. It's really exciting. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Thank you for being here and going through this topic with me, and it is a very, very deep and in-depth topic, and I feel like there's so much more we could have said, even though we've been saying a lot. There's even more.
There's a lot. There's so
more.
I know it's so crazy. You can be talking for I don't know how long this the end edit will be. That's like maybe 2 hours or something, and yet we don't feel like we scratched the surface.
Right. But it's still probably, this might be one of the greatest episodes of Ancient Aliens that's been put out. So
well, maybe we'll get picked up by a network.
Yeah. Hey, Giorgio, it's aliens.
You'd love that. I mean, we're not even saying it ironically.
Right.
How about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. I mean, I'm so excited for the work you and Shane and you're doing. I just love the your particular brand of like trying to speak to people who are interested in certain subjects in the UB and giving a scientific sort of overview and being pragmatic about it. I'm really excited to see all these episodes come out, and I'm always happy to come back as well. And in
Yeah.
whatever way I could be
You'll
useful.
definitely be back, and you're probably going to be on the Imperfection of Days podcast with me and Shane.
I know those
No,
guys.
yeah. And Shane, his 1111 podcast about spiritual growth.
Yes, he's
I know
been
that you're going
talking
to
to
be
me
on
about
there.
that as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
and he's doing great work as well. And I just love that. It just there's a really good simpatico between what you're doing together and then what you're doing either side of that as well. And I think it's great.
Yeah.
Recommend watching Our World, Our History, which is we've touched on a little bit in this podcast, and because it does a fairly clarifying narrative of some of the things we've touched on, and I'm sure in this podcast we'll be using some clippings from it to augment what we've been talking about anyway. But Josh has been intrinsic to a bunch of these videos, and this is all a team effort. We're all working together, very busily working together, and
Yes,
I
very
love it.
busily.
Yeah. I'm glad that you
Yes.
now know what it's like to be as busy as me.
Yeah.
Like this wall
Well,
to wall revelation work. It's great.
Honestly, everything that I've done in terms of making videos and all this, I couldn't have done any of it without you. You've been there since the very first step when I decided to do this, and been there the entire
Well,
process. So I
I'm blessed
really,
to be
really
able to
thank
be of
you, and I
assistance.
appreciate you so much. So
well, I appreciate you saying that, and I feel blessed to be able to help. Anybody that's trying to do good, I mean, like if I can, I'll help. I obviously have a limited bandwidth of where I'm an expert, but if I can be of assistance, that's what I want to be. So, and that's keep going, right?
yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah. I got your back and you got mine, right?
You know it. You know it. All right, buddy. Well, hey, I love you, and thank you so much for being here. And in a little tribute to Shane, I'm gonna star wipe, and we're out.